Aquila, Chapter 9. Mr. Urquhart looked at the bit of paper and then at Jeff. "Where did you find this? We saw it written down somewhere. And you want to know what it means?" "I tried looking the words up," Tom put in helpfully, "but they weren't in the dictionary." "I'm not surprised." Mr. Urquhart stared at the bit of paper. "It's in Latin." "Latin?" Jeff tried to sound as if this were of only casual interest. "Which wasn't my best subject," Mr. Urquhart continued, "though I did scrape a GCSE. He handed the paper back to Jeff. "How can I help you?" "Well, we want to find out what it means." "That is what it means." The bell rang for the start of lessons, and Mr. Urquhart sat down at his desk. Roughly speaking, a little literal translation would be, "I stand ready to serve." Now, unless there's anything else. "No, thank you." Jeff and Tom walked to their seats at the back of the class. It was better than either of them had dared hope. If a machine asks how it can help you, then it is probably expecting you to ask for some sort of help. And there were plenty of ways the boys could think of that Aquila might be able to do that. Unfortunately, it had asked them in Latin, presumably a consequence of the fact that it had belonged to a Roman, so conversation was not going to be easy. "Try the library at lunchtime, shall we?" Jeff murmured as they sat down. "Good idea," said Tom. They found 7 books on Latin in the library. They were ink-stained and shabby and dated from the days when learning Latin at school had been as commonplace as doing maths or English. There were 3 dictionaries, 2 grammars, a copy of Caesar's Gallic Wars, and a paperback called Latin Made Simple, written for people who were trying to teach themselves. Tom started with the dictionaries. Jeff's idea was that they should make up a simple question in Latin to ask Aquila. It didn't matter what the question was, he said. All they needed was something they could try out. If Aquila answered the question, even if it was an answer the boys could not understand, they would at least know they were on the right track. But it was turning out to be a lot more difficult task than they thought. Jeff had suggested translating something short like, "What does this light do?" or "How high can you go?" But even such simple sentences were not easy to translate. The dictionary, for instance, did not have anything for the word does, but had a choice of 9 different words for can. Looking at the grammar books was no help at all. They were filled with pages of details about irregular deponent verbs of the 4th congregation that meant nothing to the boys at all. "Typical, isn't it?" muttered Jeff. "What?" "The one subject that might actually be useful, and schools don't teach it anymore." Tom was flipping through the pages of Latin Made Simple. "If it doesn't matter what we ask, I suppose we could try one of these." He pointed to one of the exercises set at the end of the chapter. It was a series of sentences to be turned into Latin, and 1 or 2 of them were questions. "I know they're in English here," said Tom, "but it's got the answers at the back of the book." "What sort of questions?" asked Jeff. "Are they in the garden with the boys?" Tom read. It wasn't exactly the sort of thing you were burning to know, Jeff thought, but it might serve their purpose. The news was greeted in the staff room with understandable disbelief. "They're what?" asked Miss Taylor. "They're teaching themselves Latin." Miss Polson couldn't help smiling as she said it. "Graham Urquhart found them in the library." "Reynolds and Baxter. Learning Latin." Miss Taylor stared at her across the coffee table. "Are you serious?" "I know it's odd." Miss Polson had just come from the library, but that's what they were doing. "It's not odd. It's unbelievable." Miss Taylor frowned. "What did Graham say exactly?" "Just that he found them at one of the tables, surrounded by dictionaries, notepads, and paper, beavering away." "Oh, this is ridiculous," Miss Taylor snorted. "Those 2 boys are doing something, and I demand to know what it is." Jeff pressed the button. "Service sto" appeared in the air just as before, and Tom read out the first of the questions he had highlighted in the book. "Sunt-ne in horto campueris?" The reply was instantaneous and was a single word. "Nescio." "It talks!" A beatific smile spread across Jeff's face. "It talks!" "Unfortunately, it only talks Latin." Tom started carefully copying the word onto a piece of paper. "I wonder what it means." "We can find out what it means." Jeff leaned back in Aquila with a smile of satisfaction. What matters is it talks. Go on, ask it one of the others. Tom read the next question from the book. Cur magistri puellas opugnabant? It meant, why were the masters attacking the girls? And again, Aquila's reply was instantaneous. Que puelle? Oh, this is great. Jeff smiled happily. This is fantastic. Give us another one. Go on. When he had finished copying the reply, Tom asked the next question. And the result this time was a lot more than a couple of words. Whole pages of writing suddenly filled the air in front of them, arranged in a curved space around them that was over 2 meters long and about a meter high. Wow, Jeff breathed. What did you ask that time? Which country do you come from? Said Tom. He knew he would never be able to copy down all the reply, but he made a start on the first sentence. Neat, really neat. Jeff nodded happily. His only worry was how long it might take Tom to translate all these replies. In the library, when they had asked Mr. Urquhart how long it took people to learn Latin, he had said 8 or 9 years was not uncommon. Jeff did not want to wait that long. What they needed was some expert help. Are you sure they weren't winding you up? Quite sure. In the library, Mr. Urquhart was showing Miss Taylor the table where the boys had been working. In fact, I only found what they were doing by accident. They were trying to keep it a secret. A secret. They had a couple of football annuals propped up to hide what they were doing. If I hadn't come behind them to put some books away, I'd never have known. Miss Taylor shook her head. She still found the whole thing very difficult to believe. I'm calling a meeting for 4 o'clock this afternoon, she said. I want anyone who teaches those boys or has even talked to them in the last fortnight to be there. We have to get to the bottom of this. Is that all right with you? Of course. And we'll need all the information we can get. I wonder when the last time was that anyone searched their desks. Searched there. Mr. Urquhart looked rather startled. Wouldn't that be an invasion of privacy? Miss Taylor gave him a pitying glance. You'd better come with me to the classroom and show me where they sit. She led the way out of the library. You've really no idea what this Latin business was about? None at all. Mr. Urquhart followed the deputy headmistress down the corridor to the form room. It just seemed they wanted to learn. Tom even asked if I could give him lessons, but I told him I wouldn't be much use. I said they'd need someone like Mr. Hodge. Mr. Hodge had come to Staveley Boys' Grammar School 35 years before to teach Latin and Greek. As the years passed, the demand for these subjects had declined. The grammar school had become a comprehensive, and Mr. Hodge had had to adapt his teaching abilities to other areas. At the moment, he taught something called home skills, which involved helping young people learn the things they would need to know when they had houses and families of their own. It was not a job that suited him. Mr. Hodge had no family, and his house was notoriously unhygienic. He was due to retire in a year, and the Board of Governors prayed that no student would actually die in one of his safety in the home lessons before then. It looked like being a close-run thing. When Tom and Jeff found him, he was setting out some ironing boards and irons, ready to teach 5D the finer points of ironing a shirt. He had snagged his fingers twice and had a nasty burn on his forearm, which he was running under the cold tap. "What do you want?" he asked when he saw the boys. He had a nervous, hunted look and regarded most children with some suspicion. "If it's not too much trouble," said Jeff, "we wondered if you could tell us what this means." He passed over the paper on which Tom had written the replies that Aquila had made. Mr. Hodge looked at the paper. "I don't know." "I thought you used to teach Latin," said Tom. "I did." Mr. Hodge took his arm from under the cold tap and put on his glasses. "That's what nescio means. First person singular of the verb not to know. The next one is what girls. And this last paragraph is really rather interesting." He looked up at the boys. "Where did you get this?" "It's a sort of puzzle," said Jeff. "Is it? It's not a text I've come across before, but it seems clear enough." A curious change had come over Mr. Hodge's face as he studied the words. The hunted look had disappeared, and his eyes glinted with enthusiasm. It says, "This life raft was made by the people of Deneb in the 4th decade of the reign of the Emperor Dbengpar as part of one of the many flying warships built to defend his property from the treacherous and deceitful Eurilian." He paused. "Does that mean anything to you?" "Where's Deneb?" asked Tom. "I've no idea." Mr. Hodge shook his head. "The only Deneb I've heard of is a star, somewhere in the constellation of Cygnus. Would that fit your puzzle at all?" "Yes," Jeff nodded slowly. "It might fit rather well." "It's beautifully phrased." Mr. Hodge read the Latin to himself once more, relishing the words as they rolled off his tongue. But before he could finish, the water in the sink overflowed onto the power cable leading to one of the irons. There was a loud bang as the fuse blew. Mr. Hodge stepped back in alarm. He tripped over the end of an ironing board, clanged his head on the corner of a table, and fell to the floor. Tom and Jeff waited with him until the ambulance arrived. It seemed the least they could do in return for his help, though they were both anxious to write down the translation he had given them before they forgot it. As soon as she saw it, Miss Taylor knew that she had found what she was looking for. The exercise book had been lying quite openly in Tom's desk. On the cover was written Aquila in large capital letters, and underneath it was a drawing of an eagle carrying a banner in its mouth with the words, "Licet voler si in tergo aquilae volat." She flipped through the pages in which Tom had carefully recorded everything that had happened since the day Jeff had fallen into the cave. As well as the writing, there were maps, newspaper cuttings, and drawings of the dashboard of Aquila, with careful descriptions of what some of the lights did. As Miss Taylor turned the pages, everything slotted into place. However unlikely, she knew there was only one explanation that could possibly fit all the facts. She passed the book to Mr. Urquhart, who rifled through it and gave a low whistle. "We need a photocopy," said Miss Taylor, "and then we have to get this book back in his desk before afternoon lessons. I don't want them to suspect anything. Not yet." They finally had the answer they'd been looking for, Jeff realized. At the front of the class, Miss Polson was talking about the Treaty of Versailles, but Jeff, in a world of his own, was not even pretending to listen. Aquila could talk. They could ask it what each of the various buttons did. They could find out when it had been made and who for. They could ask it what the matter was if anything went wrong. It could tell them what it could do, how it worked, who the Eurilians were. The answers, of course, would be in Latin, and they would not be able to ask Mr. Hodge for translations on any regular basis, not without arousing suspicion. But Tom would get the hang of it eventually. Jeff had great faith in his friend. He was a lot smarter than most people realized. Beside him, Tom was busily filling in the details of the day's events in the exercise book he had taken from his desk. "It explains why there was nothing written down at the site, doesn't it? He whispered. "What?" "I always wondered why the centurion didn't have anything written down, like a book of instructions to remind him what all the lights did." Tom pointed to his exercise book. "I mean, I've written everything down, but he didn't have to, did he? All he had to do was ask." Jeff looked at Tom's book. "You've written everything down in there?" "Yes." Tom looked up. "Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing really," said Jeff. "Only I don't think you should leave it in your desk. We don't want anyone else to find it, do we?"